here, so we should be good to go here on part 2 of instruments. Let me do something real quick here. Siri, set a timer for 39 minutes.
Roger that. T-minus 39 minutes and counting.
Everything is A-OK. I hearken back to a youth of the mid-60s. There was a television program called Major Astro. Google it. Everything is A-OK, kids. Love that. Anyway, now, getting back to instruments. Here we go. Again, remember, 5 different types of altitudes, 4 different types of airspeeds. Know them. Know what they are. Okay? Now, let's look at the face of the airspeed indicator. Let me see if I can go bigger here. Stand by. Here we go. So let's look at this. Now, you'll notice here that we have several things going on. First of all, we have several yellow annoying boxes. Okay? But those annoying boxes are going to show us some things here that are really pretty cool. This is something else, guys, that you're going to have to know what these things are and what they mean for your individual aircraft. So we have an airspeed indicator. Notice that the indication here is in knots. Well, what else could it be in? It might be in miles per hour if you have an older airplane, because some of the older airplanes actually used miles per hour as opposed to knots. So this is using knots, not miles per hour. And so we look here, we see that here on this side, I'm gonna do this because I need to be able to draw on this thing. So let's do this. And you'll notice here at this portion of the instrument that we have a very low number. You'll notice here, as we move around this way, we get a higher number, okay? So, as that needle moves around, then the lower numbers are going to be here, and then the needle moves around clockwise to show higher numbers there, okay? That's kind of how this thing works. We notice also on this that we have a couple of things going on here. This part of this I'll talk about in a little bit. Some of the airspeed indicators have this, some of them don't. The backup airspeed indicator that we have in the Diamonds, they do not have this. But we'll notice something here kind of right off the bat. First of all, we notice that we have this white arc right there. Okay, so notice the white arc. Next, notice the fact that there is also a green arc, okay? Notice that. Then we have, as more colors, we have a yellow arc. Notice that. Then we have this red line right there, okay? Now, we got that? So here's what these lines mean. Whenever you start flying an airplane, you become familiar with the POH or the AFM, Pilot's Operating Handbook, Airplane Flight Manual, okay? Or Flying Manual, depending upon, the printer. And in that, it's going to give you various airspeeds of operation. You'll have normal operation, you'll have special operations, you'll have emergency operations. There are certain indicated airspeed numbers that you as a pilot are going to memorize having to do with that particular airplane. But what's the best way to memorize something? It's to not have to memorize something. So, the manufacturers, they have indications on the airspeed indicator itself to help you remember the certain operational envelopes for your specific aircraft. Now, it's not your individual airplane, but it's like a type. If you have a Cessna 172 that is equipped with 3 notches of flaps and a particular engine, all of those 172s are going to have an airspeed indicator with these colors that match at these particular air speeds. So that's kind of how that works, is because it's individual for that type of aircraft with certain equipment. The reason I say 3 notches of flaps, I flew a 172 when I first started flying that had 4 notches of flaps. And let me tell you something. You hung that last notch of flaps out there, and I mean, it's just like dropping a barn door behind that airplane. You could land that airplane and basically walk beside it as you did it. That's how slow you could land that airplane. It was nuts. But you have airspeeds, you have indications here on your airspeed indicator that will help you with these phases of flight. Let's check them out. We'll start with the white arc. So here on the white arc, you're going to notice that the bottom of the white arc, and when I say the bottom, I mean the lowest number. Yes, I get it. That's actually toward the top of the airspeed indicator, but it is the bottom of the arc when it comes to the size of the numbers. So the bottom of the arc is going to be the lower number. The top of the arc is going to be right there. Okay? So now we're going to look at the little hash marks and we're going to see, okay, what does that number mean? Well, if we look here, we can see that there's 40, that's going to be 35, and that bottom of that arc is just a little bit below that. That's going to be approximately 34 knots. Now, what is it that's at 34 knots? I'm going to erase this here. This is your full flap operating range. Full flap operating range. The books will tell you it is the flap operating range. However, it is full flaps. So if you have 3 notches of flaps on your airplane, this is that 3rd notch. It's the most flaps that you have on an airplane. That's what this arc indicates. It's not when you can put your 1st notch of flaps in when you're thinking about landing. It is full flaps. Any operations at an airspeed greater than this could result in damage to your flap system. So you got to be careful with this. So the white arc is the full flap operating range for your airplane. So we can see here at the top of this arc, so there's 80, and that's going to be 85, so 84. So we're going to say approximately 84 knots indicated. That is going to be the airspeed that you have to be at or below to put that last notch of flaps in. So in this particular airplane, you have to be at or below 84 knots to put your last notch of flaps in. Then you can use that last notch of flaps in airspeeds that are less than 84. You can see here the numbers get smaller until you get to that mark right there. That is at the bottom of that arc. That is the stall speed. That is the stall speed of that airplane with full flaps. So when you're in level flight at max gross weight, that is your stall speed of that airplane. So at 34 knots, that is approximately where that aircraft will stall with your wings level. Okay? So the bottom of that arc is going to be your stall speed with full flaps. Got it? Now then, let's look at the green arc. Let me first of all erase all of my red marks on this thing. Okay? All right, so now let's look at the green arc. So we notice here that the green arc, the bottom of the green arc comes to right there. The top of the green arc comes to right there. So when we look at the green arc, we know the white arc is with full flaps. Okay? But green is clean. Green is clean. So what that means is that the green arc That is going to be your normal operating range for this aircraft with no flaps. Green is clean, okay? But here's something that's a little tricky about this. Well, before I say that, let me talk about this little mark right down here. So if we look right there, if the bottom of the white arc showed the stall speed with full flaps, what do you think the bottom of the green arc is going to show us? Yep, that's going to be stall speed clean. So in this case, if we look at this, we have 60, here's 50, there's 55. So at 55 knots, at approximately 55 knots, stall speed clean. So that is going to mean that in a wings level configuration, with no flaps, your airplane will stall at 55 knots. Okay? Oh, I'm sorry, no, 45, forgive me, 45, I screwed that up. Stand by. Has it been a Monday? I think it kind of has. Wow. So there's 60, here's 50, that's 45. Forgive me, guys. So your airplane will stall. I thought that was weird that there was that huge of a differential between full flaps and no flap stall speed. Anyway, that is 45 knots indicated on this particular airplane. This does not apply to all airplanes. It's just this one. And this is just some mythical airplane that they're using here for illustrative purposes. At the bottom of the green arc, that airspeed indicated there is where that airplane will stall with no flaps. Okay? So that's what that means. So VS1 means that's stall speed clean. VSO means that is going to be your stall speed in a landing configuration with full flaps. Okay? So that's what that means. Let me get rid of this. Then we look at the top of the white arc and we say, okay, so here we are. Let's see if I can do this right. Here's 120, there's 125. I'm going to go at approximately 126 indicated airspeed right there. About approximately 126 knots right there is your normal operating range of that airplane. Now, does that mean that I can't go any faster than 126 knots? Because again, when I look at this illustration here, I see a lot more numbers up here. So what does that mean here, this top of this green arc? What that top of that green arc means is that this is the operating range of this airplane in most flying conditions. In most flying conditions, this is going to be the operating range of your airplane. Okay? Most flying conditions. It's called the normal operating range, VNO, but it gets confusing. What does VNO stand for? Maximum structural cruising speed, of course. I know. That's what it means. VNO means maximum structural cruising speed. Well, that's not the fastest that airplane will go. It's just the fastest that airplane should go in that green arc when it starts getting lumpy, okay? When you start having turbulence, you want to be at or below that airspeed. There's another airspeed that is not on this illustration that we're going to talk about in just a second. It's called VA, but we'll get there in just a second. So when we look here, this is the normal operating range or the maximum structural cruising speed. It's confusing because that really doesn't mean normal operating range. It is the normal operating range, but they refer to that as the maximum structural cruising speed. However, we have this yellow arc right here. Well, the yellow arc, this indicates the airspeed that you may operate this airplane in in smooth air. So the yellow arc has to do with smooth air operations. If it's a magic carpet day, go for it there, super pilot. But if it starts to get a little lumpy, you need to back that airspeed down. Why? Because you could get an updraft or a downdraft or hit a little part of turbulence that if you're going faster than the normal operating range, you could get some form of structural damage to your airplane. So you got to slow that bad boy down. Okay? So that's what the yellow arc is. Smooth air operation only. Starts to get lumpy, back off that throttle. Okay? That's it. Then at the top of the yellow arc, where you have that red line. The red line, anytime you hear something about a red line, that means that's a line that should not be crossed. Okay? Same way it is here on an airspeed indicator. VNE, never exceed. That means never. Never. And the reason being is because operating that aircraft at an airspeed above or beyond that red line is now you're a test pilot and now you may have stuff starting to fall off your airplane. And that could just be the beginning of a bad day. Okay? So that is it. VNE, never exceed that speed. White arc, full flap operating range. Green arc, normal operating range, maximum structural cruising speed. Yellow arc, smooth air operation only. Red line, VNE, never exceed. Okay? So now let's think about, I want to go back to the white arc for just a second. Remember, that's full flaps. So you could in your airplane, as you're starting to fly in, you may have a type of an airplane that tells you, and normally it'll tell you right beside your flap switch, it'll say that your first notch of flaps you can put in at, and I'm making this up, at 110 knots. So you may be able to put your first notch of flaps in at 110 knots. You may be able to put your second notch of flaps in at 95 knots. But then you put that landing flap or last notch of flaps in there at the top of the white arc. Okay, that's what that's there to kind of remind you. All right, so just kind of keep that in mind. Wow. Okay, let me get out of this. Come on, baby. Okay, there's that. All right. Wow. Okay. The bullet points down below this will go through some of these V speeds, okay? And when you go through these, you need to know these V speeds. You need to know these V speeds. Now then, we're going to talk about something else called VA. When you look at your books and you look here, there is something called VA. This is a biggie. VA is something that we refer to as maneuvering speed. Maneuvering speed. The Cirrus, I think Cirrus calls it VO. And then there are other aircraft, and I have seen this elsewhere, where you have like different things. It's like VP, like as in Paul, as in like penetration, like turbulent penetration speed. It's just kind of weird. VA, maneuvering speed. That's the one that you need to know. And then as long as you know what that means, then you can apply it to whatever V speed your airplane happens to tell you that it is. Okay, VA, it is maneuvering speed. What that means is this: that is the maximum speed at which you can apply one full deflection of one control surface, a primary control surface. It's where you can apply one full without structural damage to the airplane. For instance, if you're, let's just say hypothetically you live in the mountains. You get some mountain wave, you get some turbulence, things are starting to get a little lumpy, okay? You want to slow that airplane down to that VA at least, and no more, than whatever that speed happens to be for your airplane, because you can get updrafts, downdrafts, side drafts, wind shear, Lord knows what can happen. It's weather in a blender sometimes. And what can happen is that to keep your wings level, you may have to really kind of work on the controls to maintain control of your aircraft. By staying at or below that speed, it will allow you to make one full deflection, one time of one control surface. It can be aileron, it can be elevator, it can be rudder, without causing structural damage to the airplane. That is not what VA used to mean. VA used to mean is that it's the speed at which you could keep stuff falling off your airplane if you got into turbulence. But they changed the definition after November of 2001. November of 2001, and you guys can Google this, is, I believe I have this date correct. That is when, I want to say it was a Delta airplane. I don't recall. I know it was an Airbus. An Airbus was departing New York, and I can't remember which airport at New York. The Airbus was departing New York, and it flew into the wake turbulence of a departing 747. Now, we've talked about what wake turbulence can do. It flew into the wake turbulence of a departing 747. When that happened, the co-pilot, the first officer, the pilot flying the airplane, had controls of the airplane at the time, and to try to stabilize that airplane, he starts sawing on the rudders. He starts these wild deflections of the rudder to try to stabilize the airplane. When that happened, it caused such stress on the vertical stabilizer that it ripped it off the back of the airplane. When it ripped it off the back of the airplane, then unfortunately, the airplane just, it nosed down. Airplane broke apart on the way down, and everyone on the plane was killed. Several people on the ground were killed, and it was a horrible event. The post-crash analysis of that, when they got the black box recorders and they saw what had happened, this is when they said, oh my gosh, we really shouldn't saw away, on these controls. We need to have this so that we basically make one full deflection without causing damage to the airplane. Does that mean that in a span of 10 minutes of lumpy flying that you can only, do one full deflection of the ailerons? That's not what that means. But what it means is you can't be doing this, okay? You can't be doing this. Because when you start doing that, it's going to cause such structural stress on your airplane that you could have some issues, okay? So VA. Now, the reason that VA is not indicated on your airspeed indicator is because it depends. Depends on what? What do you think it would depend on? I'll bet it's the weight of your aircraft. If your aircraft is heavy, VA could be 108 knots. If your aircraft is light, it could be 98 knots. It depends on each aircraft. And that's a number that you need to know. In case you don't know it, there's a little placard that is somewhere on your avionics panel, normally close to your airspeed indicator, that tells you what VA is, heavy and light, for your airplane. So this is another reason why, from a weight and balance standpoint, you need to know your takeoff weight of your airplane and to know kind of where you are, you know, with the weight of your airplane as you fly, because it has a direct bearing on what airspeed you fly should you really get into some turbulence. Okay, so it's on a placard near your airspeed indicator, but know that you have a higher airspeed for a heavier airplane and a little bit lower airspeed for a lighter aircraft. VA, maneuvering speed. Know it, live it, learn it, love it. Okay? You have other things that really kind of make sense. VLO, this is your landing gear operating speed. That doesn't mean in all conditions. VLO, the maximum speed of extending or retracting the landing gear if flying an aircraft with retractable gear. It depends. It depends on the airplane, because you could have an airplane that you can put the gear out at 150 knots, but you have to have them sucked up before you get to 110 knots. So again, it kind of depends. And so you have VLE. So here you have landing gear extension speed. So that's kind of where you have different V speed for whether or not you put them out or whether you suck them up. Then we have something here called VX and VY. Okay, now here's VX and VY. These have to do with takeoff speeds. In most cases, we take off with an airplane with one notch of flaps, the first notch of flaps. Remember what happens. It extends the actual cord line of our wing, giving us greater lift, you know, especially when we need it to get off the ground in a hurry. But we also know that as we're climbing out, we reach a certain point of diminishing return where those flaps actually hurt us more than they help us. So at some point we need to suck those flaps up, get clean and get some speed, right? But to get up and out, we have a couple of different options. We can look at a higher angle of taking off to get up and out, to say clear this mythical FAA 50-foot tree at the end of our runway. So we may need a better angle to get up and out to clear an obstacle, or then we may not have any obstacles and we want the most efficient use of a climb to give us a better rate. Okay? So here's what you need to know. VX, I'm going to do this because I'm going to draw here a little bit. VX, it gives us the greatest gain. I covered that up. That's not good. VX, it gives us the greatest gain of altitude for a given distance. And in this, it is the best angle. Okay? VX, the greatest gain of altitude in a given distance. Angle. VY, it gives us the greatest gain of altitude over a period of time. It is about rate. Okay? VX, angle, greatest amount of altitude over a given distance. This gets us up and over that 50-foot tree at the end of the runway. VY, that gives us the greatest gain of altitude over time. It is a better rate, okay? Here's what that's going to look like. And if we think about this in an indicated airspeed, this could be 66 knots. This could be 71 knots. 66 knots, 71 knots. What does that mean? Well, if we're slowing, if we're at full power, we want full power, we're trying to get up and out to give us the best. And guys, somehow we just got our signal was just interrupted there somehow, and I'm not sure why, and I'm not sure where I left you. Shoot. I'll have to go back and look at that, and if so, I'll have to record another piece of this. So this is still part 2 here. I apologize. We just talked about VX and VY. Now we have a couple of others here that we're looking at having to do with VYSE. Here, It is on multi-engine airplanes, single engine operations on a multi-engine airplane. It has a blue line on your airspeed indicator, and that's normally the line that you kind of want to use as a reference for most of your climbs, etc. For multi-engine aircraft. And then you have something called VMC, which is a minimum control speed. This again has to do with single engine airplanes. When single engine operation, not single engine airplanes, multi-engine aircraft that are now, you lose an engine and now you are a single in a multi. The aerodynamics and the power and everything else becomes quite a bit different in these, and so there's other speeds that you need to kind of check. So that's kind of it on the airspeed things. So there's that. Let me get out of this. Okay. Then we look at issues. What happens if we have a blockage in our static system here? So if we have a blocked static system, if the pitot tube is blocked and we can't get that ram air pressure in there in the pitot tube, we're not going to get any airspeed. Okay, that's just not the way it's going to work. So I want you guys to look at this, and I want you to see kind of what would happen here. In the unlikely event that your pitot tube gets blocked and your static source gets blocked, it's going to kind of seal the system, and so whatever reading that you had on your pitot tube, on your airspeed indicator, now your airspeed indicator is going to kind of act like an altimeter, sort of, is sort of how that'll work. But that really doesn't happen very often. And the reason being is because when you look at your systems, in addition to this system here, you also have an alternate static port that you can open inside the cabin. The pressure is a little bit different inside than it will be outside, even in a non-pressurized setting, but it's close enough to give you safer operations. And you just kind of have to know that your pressure inside is a little bit lower than the pressure outside, but it's not going to be that much to make a huge difference in the safe operation of your airplane. So again, if you get them both blocked, that's kind of how that's going to work. Block static system, if these get blocks, this tells you kind of what happens here. If you get everything blocked in these systems. And we're going to get to the electronic flight displays here in just a second. One of the things that I do want to point out is that let's say this. Let's say that you have an emergency, and let me open this up because I want to look at this. Give me just a second here, guys. I'm trying to adjust this. And then I want to go this way. Here we go. Stand by. Okay. Now, let's say this gets blocked. Let's say this gets blocked. And let's say that your alternate static inside your airplane, because remember that first illustration showed the alternate static, meaning that you have a little switch that you can open inside the cabin of your airplane to open that system up to at least the pressure inside the airplane. Let's say that didn't work. So we've had 1, 2, 3 failures here of this static system. What could you do? You break the glass on your vertical speed indicator. Why? Because it opens up that system, again, opens up to the pressure inside the cockpit at least, so it acts sort of like an alternate static system, and it's also the cheapest instrument to replace. So that's what you do. If you get a complete static, pitot-static system blockage and the alternate static fails, break the glass on the vertical speed indicator, and that'll open up that system again to at least the pressure inside the airplane. It's an old trick, just saying. Okay, now let's get back to this. Close this, scoot this over. There's, oops, hang on, there's that. All right, now then, now we start looking at things sort of the way that they look in the Diamond DA40. This is the Garmin G1000. And when we look at this, now instead of these round gauges like we talked about here before with the pedostatic system, now we're looking at tapes. So remember, on this display, here is your altimeter. Here is your airspeed indicator. Here is your vertical speed. So here's your VSI. Here's your altimeter. Here's your airspeed indicator. Okay? Well, the old clock on the wall, or the old duck in the phone, as it were, tells us that we're at the end of this. I'll go back and I'll look and I'll see where we dropped that video segment, and I'm not sure. It's the first time that's happened, so I don't know what happened there. But I'll look at that again to see if I missed anything with that airspeed indicator piece, VX or VY, and then I'll let you guys know if there's something there that I missed. Hopefully I didn't miss too much of it. And then we're going to pick this up here again at the next class for Wednesday. We'll pick that up here on the electronic or the digital imagery here versus the analog imagery for the instruments on the static system. Remember, we still have to get through gyroscopic and we have to go through magnetic. Okay, so there you go. Guys, have a fabulous afternoon. Let me get back here and I'm going to start shutting this thing off, searching for devices on the network. This is clunky. So I'll get that done and we are done.